Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Manchester is Red podcast, being recorded on Tuesday morning. Manchester is baking in glorious sunshine at the start of this week. It's about 25 degrees outside. Just looking out of my downstairs window now and can see blue skies as far as the eye can see. It is beautiful weather, great weather to sit in the garden and listen to a podcast. So I hope that's where you're all tuning in. I'm Tyrone Marshall, hosting today and being joined by Samuel Luckhurst. And Samuel, I can see the sun shining in through that window in your room there as well. It's beautiful weather for a change here, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's a little bit cooler from the holiday temperatures I experienced earlier in the month, which were nigh and unbearable. As I said to Stephen, I was holidaying in the same vicinity as Casemiro, and by the end of it, I think I was walking around like him as well. We were both severely lacking match fitness.
Yeah, it's not quite as warm as Florida, but for Manchester and the summer we've had so far, it's doing very nicely. We'll jump straight in. Then, as I say, we're recording this on Tuesday morning, so it's the morning of the England game. So there'll be very little Euros chat, seeing as we've got no idea what is going to happen tonight. And on the evidence of recent England performances, it could be absolutely anything. We'll start with some United chat, and I suppose that the big news in the world around Old Trafford is the story that broke over the weekend. Samuel, you did the line yesterday that Ruud van Nistelrooy considering an offer to join the coaching staff at United. It's a very big name and it's pretty big news. I mean, fill us in on the latest, really, and what's going on there.
Well, he spoke to Burnley last week, and I thought when I heard that's if you're a Burnley fan, that's quite an exciting appointment. That would be an appointment to get behind after Vincent Kompany went to Bayern Munich, and Van Nistelrooy. Of course, he's a big name from when he was a player, but he has reasonable pedigree at coaching level as well. He was an assistant to Ronald Koeman and then Frank de Boer with the Netherlands national team, and then he did a reasonably decent job with PSV Eindhoven, won the Dutch Cup with them. They did fail to qualify for the Champions League a couple of years ago through a qualifier. They actually were eliminated by Rangers. So that's one of his failures in coaching. But all coaches go through successes and failures. And if you're a United fan, the prospect of him joining the coaching staff would be welcomed, just because he's, as I said, he has got pretty good coaching credentials. He has served his time as an assistant. It would be, I suppose, a little bit peculiar for someone with such a big name to accept a backseat, if you like, when the assumption all along is that he would just continue to manage clubs, and that's why the Burnley interest and the possibility of that last week, which technically is still possible, would make a lot of sense. But Van Nistelrooy is just simply he's one United's greatest strikers. 150 goals in 5 seasons. I think it was in 219 games. I mean, his first 2 seasons, he scored 80 goals, and I can't. Obviously, we both remember those seasons quite vividly, but doing that coming from the Eredivisie was exceptional. He was the PFA Player of the Year in his first season. He should have won it in the second season when he got 44 goals and United regained the title. He was unfortunate to really join the club and leave the club during this period where they did not have a great side and they weren't as successful as they perhaps should have been. He to have won the Premier League title, FA Cup, and the League Cup for a modern Man United player, that would, within a 5-year period, that would be seen as a roaring success. Back then with United, it wasn't a roaring success. So he had 5 seasons at the club, a couple of trophyless seasons, but he did win the 3 major honours in England. But when he left, that was the start of Ferguson's last great side. And when he joined the club, that was just at the end of Ferguson's second great side. Yet he's an undisputed club great. I mean, in terms of my lifetime watching United, he'd been an all-time 11 with Cantona up front, because his goal scoring is exceptional. He's probably the best goal scorer in the club's history since Dennis Law. I know obviously Wayne Rooney has got the all-time goal scoring record, but in terms of the rapid rate of goal scoring and that knack for goals and the consistency of it, I mean, this is a striker who, when he got a 30 goal season in 2003-04, it was almost seen as, well, it's not as good as his first season or his second season. There was a question that maybe it was a failure from Van Nistelrooy that season. Those were the standards that he set. He was the kind of guy that if United did win 5-0 and he hadn't scored, he was not happy about it, which is a mentality you can get behind with such a prolific goal scorer. But in terms of the coaching side, he's got experience of having coached Cody Gakpo, who was at PSV when Van Nistelrooy was the manager before he joined Liverpool. And if you're Rasmus Højlund, and look, Højlund will have been too young to have watched Van Nistelrooy, but you go on YouTube and you can watch literally every goal he scored for Manchester United. And this is also a striker who did very well with Real Madrid as well. He contributed to title-winning seasons with Madrid in successive seasons. I think just before Pep Guardiola came in, so it would have been 06, 07, 07, 08. Then Guardiola came in at Barcelona in 2008, and their period of dominance commenced in Spain. So Van Nistelrooy as a striker did it for probably the two biggest clubs in world football. And if you're Højlund and you want to get to that level, and I think a lot of people seeing Højlund at a focal point that United haven't had for an awfully long time, really. And just thinking of the strikers United have had since Van Nistelrooy moved to Madrid in 2006, there haven't been many who you'd say were a like-for-like replacement or reached the level that he did. And of course, I think there have only been 3 players since Van Nistelrooy left in 2006, as I said again, who have actually broken the 30-goal barrier. Wayne Rooney did it twice. Robin van Persie, of course, did it the last time they won the title in 2012-13, and Marcus Rashford did it a couple of seasons ago now. And United fans would hope that will not be remembered as an anomaly for Rashford. Depending on his future, you don't want his United career to only have one season where he hit the 30-goal mark. But that just gives you an idea of it's an indication of how difficult it is to establish yourself as a proven goal scorer for Manchester United. And of course, Rooney was at the club for 13 years, and he got in the end, 253 goals or something like that. But of course, that was spread out over a long time, and he didn't have many seasons where he was particularly prolific. In 2009-10, which was, in terms of goal scoring wise, and that streak he went on, that was probably his best season. I'd say in terms of goal scoring and the performance level. He actually got a little bit of flack from Ferguson at times in the 2011-12 season. That was clearly a hangover from him fluttering his eyelashes at Manchester City the previous season, and Ferguson never really truly forgave him for that, as we discovered towards the end of his time, and what developed there between him and Rooney, and the possibility of Rooney leaving in 2013. But that's why Van Nistelrooy is held in such a high regard. He's also one of these overseas players who really did become emotionally invested and emotionally attached to United, and that does go an awful long way with the match goers. And there was an extremely ardent bond between them and Van Nistelrooy from the start, probably cemented with his 2 goals at Villa Park in the FA Cup in third round in would have been January 2002. If nobody can remember or nobody is even aware, United were 2-0 down with about 15 minutes to go, not even that. And of course, they get 1 goal back, and then Van Nistelrooy equalises, and then Van Nistelrooy makes it 3-2. It's just one of those United comebacks of law, and he got the 2 goals, and there was a mass pitch invasion. And you use the word legend sparingly, or you're advised to use the word legend sparingly in our industry, but I would still attach that to him, even though he was only there for 5 years. And unfortunately for him, only got his hand on the Premier League title the one occasion, but his overall contribution was superb. And he is a player who received his own chapter in Sir Alex Ferguson's second autobiography as well, which is partly because of the way their relationship deteriorated, but also it's an acknowledgement from Ferguson of what a vital player he was to United. And that body of experience as a player, of course, we've seen so many great players struggle or fail to transmit their brilliance and their intelligence to management, and Wayne Rooney is an example of that. And it'll be interesting to see how he gets on at Plymouth, because reading his Sunday Times columns, watching his punditry on the BBC, listening to his documentary with the BBC as well, he is one of the most intelligent minds in football still. But whether it'll ever transmit to management successfully, it remains to be seen. And with Van Nistelrooy, it does help. It would help if he's, I guess, continuing to learn his trade off Erik ten Hag. But he's not a young man. He's a 47-year-old now, Ruud van Nistelrooy. He doesn't look it. He looks very, very well. But it's the kind of appointment that supporters, of course, they can get behind, as a lot of them did when Darren Fletcher was originally installed as a first team coach, which I thought was a shrewd move as well, even though it was very short-lived, because he moved into that technical director role, which does entail some coaching still. It's unclear what his title is now, but Fletcher is another one of those guys that if he's, say he was to do a podcast interview, I'd be very eager to listen to it, as was the case when Van Nistelrooy spoke to Gary Neville last year. And from a personal point of view as well, I was extremely fortunate that with the timing of it, that I ended up interviewing Van Nistelrooy the day after Ferguson's book was released in 2013. So it was kind of like an open goal in terms of getting a really good exclusive. It was a bit of a jolly as well. It was going over to Marbella and essentially observing him in close quarters through a sponsor during a Champions League game. But I was I was quite wide-eyed and a little bit starstruck when I turn up at a hotel room and knock on the door and it's opened by Ruud van Nistelrooy of all people. So that was an early career. I say an early career highlight. It's probably still one of my career highlights. So it would. I'd be particularly pleased just for United and from a personal perspective if he was to return to Old Trafford.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, do we think Erik ten Hag will be particularly pleased if he does return to Old Trafford? I mean, the kind of elephant in the room here, I guess, is this is being driven by ten Hag? Is it being driven by Ineos? We know that Jason Wilcox was a regular at training sessions towards the end of last season. Part of his kind of brief into this end of season review was to give his thoughts on training and what was going on there. I think he watched a few sessions with Brailsford and Ratcliffe, and I think there's kind of a lingering suspicion that maybe Ineos are keen to change the makeup of that coaching staff even more than maybe Ten Hag is. And I guess, I mean, the obvious change here is going to be Van Nistelrooy comes in and Benny McCarthy's contract isn't renewed. But it's kind of an interesting dynamic to this summer, isn't it? That who exactly is driving some of these changes going on?
I think that is a natural assumption that Van Nistelrooy would replace McCarthy, because it would be a little bit peculiar to have two former strikers on the coaching team. I know they come at it from different. They're looking at matches through different prisms, and McCarthy, there have been times where one's not even seen him at away games for United. He's not even got off the coach. He's not even been in the dugout. So he's not been the ever present that you would normally expect from a coach. And if Van Nistelrooy was going to United, someone as high profile as him, and that's no disrespect to Benny McCarthy, I mean, he won the Champions League and he's a name, but he's nowhere near as high profile as Van Nistelrooy is. But you'd expect Van Nistelrooy to be pretty ever present and visible. United have been very coy about this. Unsurprisingly, they've just reiterated that the priority is to get Ten Hag's contract extension sorted, and that they're not going to give any guidance on possible backroom staff appointments in the meantime. I'm sure when the time does come, someone at the club will leak it to their favoured conduit, as we're well aware of, and everyone's well aware of. But it would be interesting if Van Nistelrooy is to rejoin United, whether it's a Ten Hag driven appointment or whether it's been an appointment that Ineos have advised or Jason Wilcox has advised. That is a question to ask for another day. Clearly, where Van Nistelrooy is Dutch, and of course Ten Hag has a PSV connection as well, having served his time there on the coaching staff about, what was it, 10 or longer than that, even 12 or 13 years ago, I think it was. So it's Ten Hag has a propensity for bringing people who've worked in the Netherlands as well to Manchester United. So I think it's natural to assume that maybe Ten Hag has advised or recommended that, but Ten Hag may have wanted or might want Benny McCarthy to stick around. Also, if Van Nistelrooy is coming in as a player coach role, there are no two ways about it. He would be a hell of an upgrade on Anthony Marshall.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And we know from international tournaments of yore, really, that just because two people happen to be Dutch doesn't mean they necessarily see eye to eye. And there's certainly an element that, I mean, he's a very high-profile candidate, even regardless of his background as a United player. I mean, he was managing or head coach at PSV Eindhoven 12, 13 months ago. He's a very high-profile candidate to come into that role, isn't he? And I guess there's the potential there, as good as an appointment as it is, there's the potential there that if this season gets off to a sticky start, he kind of becomes a distraction, possibly. I mean, if the season gets off to a bad start, he's kind of interim manager in waiting, isn't he? It's got that feel about it. It's a very high-profile candidate who's managed a big Dutch club, nowhere near as successfully as Ten Hag did, but it's a big name in that kind of position behind Ten Hag when Ten Hag's trying to almost reassert his authority, I guess, isn't he?
It's another question that would get asked if Van Nistelrooy goes back to United, and I'm sure United would downplay it and stress that that's not the case at all. The manager's completely comfortable with it, but that has happened before. I mean, when Ryan Giggs was assistant to Louis van Gaal, it was pretty incessant at times. People talking about, this is the guy who's set to step into his shoes. And with Giggs, there was the added complication of a lot of his friends and former teammates being very critical of United through as pundits, because of course there's been a proliferation of United pundits in the past 10 years. At least Ten Hag doesn't have that to worry about in terms of the connection, but there are still players there. I suppose they're not as necessarily close to Van Nistelrooy as class of '92 members, but Scholes, Neville, Ferdinand, Keane, they did all play with him, and they do have different. I assume some do still have relationships with him, and some got on very well with him. And Van Nistelrooy had a very good relationship with Keane. Of course, you saw the closeness between him and Neville. If you watch that podcast or listen to it last year, Ferdinand, that there will be mutual respect there. I'm not necessarily expecting them to be going out on nights together or anything like that, but also with Scholes as well, there was their rapport on the pitch was excellent. So there's going to be a hell of a lot of respect between them. So it would be an added dynamic to consider, but you'd imagine they've properly considered it. But this is a club that were fully intent on sacking the manager until one FA Cup final and one rip-roaring performance, and then they decided to buy themselves some time as they ended up keeping him because they lost their nerve. So again, it's as much focus as there is on Ten Hag and continues to be, and there will always be. I think he's ceased to be the story in a strange way. The story is how United are being run and how they will be run in the future, because that's what the scrutiny should be fixed on now. And I think that Ten Hag, as I said, he kept up his end of the bargain, so to speak, by winning the FA Cup and salvaging the season, not making it a success, I might add. But it was Ineos's decision to keep him that should be scrutinised, and I know Sir Jim Ratcliffe fronted up last week with that lengthy interview with Bloomberg, and he spoke to the Times as well. But his comments on the manager, he seemed almost reluctant. I mean, the key quote I thought was when he was talking about the pillars at the club, essentially the decision makers, which will be the technical director, the chief executive, and the sporting director, who's almost absolving himself of the decision to keep Ten Hag, which was what I was told all along, that he wouldn't be the main kingmaker with that. But going forward, if you're the co-owner of Manchester United and you're the face of the new Manchester United, which Ratcliffe is really, and he has spoken quite a lot, you are almost duty bound to pull rank, if you like. But he's it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. But I think in the meantime, there's no harm in getting someone who's got good coaching potential, good experience, um, and clearly must be rated by Ten Hag. It's a big story if Ten Hag hasn't okayed this and doesn't want Van Nistelrooy coming in, but we'll have to wait and see whether that is the case. But that's the last thing United could do with after they eventually decided to keep a manager who they were fully intending to sack.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all for part one. We're back after the break to dip our toe into the transfer market. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. A bit of transfer window chat. Then the transfer window been open for 11 days now. Still fairly slow progress, I guess. There is a new transfer deadline day creeping upon us on Sunday. The PSR deadline. You do wonder what's becoming of football when we're having a PSR transfer deadline day and all talk of all these strange deals that have been going on this week. I mean, it does make a farce of the rules that the four clubs who are so close to PSR limits have suddenly taken interest in each other's academy players and they're swapping them left, right, and centre. It's not really an issue for United, who seem to be fairly comfortable with their PSR compliance. It's obviously been pretty tight, but they don't seem to be desperate to get anyone out the door.
No.
Other clubs have been. We know Everton have already fallen foul of these rules twice and had 2 points deductions. They're pretty close to the limit. They've sold, I think, now Lewis Dobbin to Aston Villa. It looked like Calvert-Lewin was going to Newcastle. That may be in doubt. I mean, I guess it's a relevance to United in that they were maybe hoping that it would lower the price for Jared Branthwaite before Sunday, but it seems that Everton are pretty determined to sell anyone other than Jared Branthwaite to make up for any limits in terms of their PSR compliance and what they need to sell. And you can understand that when he is clearly the best asset in their squad, isn't he?
He is. I agree with you. Just the fact that people are even talking about a separate transfer deadline in June, it just bores me to tears. I get that it has relevance to clubs, but and of course it's the end of the financial year, and they want to essentially enhance their balance sheets. And there was a really good piece on the BBC about it yesterday as well, that was quite rigorous in terms of spelling it out and simplifying it with contribution from Kieran Maguire, who's the go-to guy for football finance. But from what I was told last week by people at United, it wasn't a deadline that would be causing them undue stress to get players out the door, unlike with other clubs. I mean, Chelsea have been dobbed into it, and there's been a fair amount of chatter this calendar year about Conor Gallagher possibly being sold by that 30th of June deadline. I hate even referring to it as a deadline, actually, but given that he's going to be tied up playing for England tonight, and then possibly in a round of 16 tie later on this weekend, I don't necessarily see that being his priority to get out of a club that he's been at for a long time and where he was a starter last season. So I suspect Chelsea have prioritised other outgoings, but I suppose it's a mess of the Premier League's own making. I mean, I agree with the essence of trying to curb spending, because it's obscene, some of the money that gets spent on players, on their salaries, the agents' fees as well. I get that it's a reality of football, and it's a way people make money and make a living, and that's fine. But it has become out of control a fair bit in recent years. But there are loopholes galore to exploit, and you just look at the way these clubs are going about it, and there have been recent examples as well. But I think between Juventus and Barcelona maybe 4 years ago, the Arta and Miralem Pjanic swap deal, and how it was essentially done just for financial motives. There was no real football logic behind it whatsoever. It was an admission of defeat by both clubs in reality, because there was no when you conduct a transfer or a swap deal, logically you're looking to enhance your team or enhance your squad, and that clearly wasn't the case with that deal, and a lot of people saw through it. And there have been some other deals that have been very iffy, and really, I mean, United seldom do swap deals. There are very few high-profile swap deals in football, and these swap deals, of course, are getting done just to, in effect, just to really improve balance sheets, so clubs who are struggling to comply with PSR do so, and it gives them a better chance of it. There were clubs in January who were just spooked from doing deals because of the points deductions that were meted out to Everton, and it was going to happen to Forest as well. So that's why there was next to no spending in January. So the rules have succeeded to an extent, but I think it is one flaw that it becomes an incentive to get rid of homegrown players, academy players who are important, and Gallagher is one example. I mean, if Mauricio Pochettino was still at Chelsea, he'd be fighting tooth and nail not to sell Conor Gallagher, because he was such an important player for them last season, such a regular starter. Scott McTominay had his best season for United, scored 10 goals, almost all of them extremely important, starting the FA Cup final, and was pivotal in that victory as well. Yeah, and I know that his contract situation, it raises some uncertainty over his future, and that there's a maximum expiry date of 2026. But it does seem to defeat the essence of football clubs, and particularly United, how important the academy is, that it becomes an incentive or a get out to sell players that you've developed, because it represents a pure profit. It obviously helps with someone like Mason Greenwood, who United are proactively trying to get rid of, and whatever fee they get for him, that will reflect as a pure profit. But by and large, academy players that you've developed, you want to keep, unless you're Manchester City, in which you get. I'd say they haven't got the balance right, because they've still not had enough breakthroughs into the first team squad. And you look at City as a squad, and it's what is it? Just it's Phil Foden and Rico Lewis. I'm struggling to think of any other name
Yeah,
who've
pretty
come through
much. Yeah, I
the
think it is.
academy.
Yeah.
Cole Palmer is not a player that City should ever have been selling. He should have been Riyad Mahrez's replacement last year. And it's sometimes these deals, they offer a PR victory for both clubs. City can say, look at the obscene amount of money we've got for Cole Palmer. Chelsea can say, certainly come the end of the season, or even far earlier than that, look at the brilliant player that we've got, who is worth 3 times that amount now, which Cole Palmer is. I mean, he's if anyone was to try and get him off Chelsea's hands, you're looking at a 9-figure fee, you'd imagine. And with the Branthwaite situation, there's no way United are ever going to get near the 70 million mark that Everton value him at, and I don't think there's any chance that Everton would ever be in a position where a club is coming to them and offering 70 million pounds either. But it's a starting point. It's a negotiation tactic from Everton to value him within that bracket of 70 million to 80 million. It's a negotiation tactic from United to submit a bid that was never ever going to get accepted. £35 million rising to 43 million. And then as the clubs continue to talk, the expectation, or certainly the intention, you'd imagine, would be to meet somewhere in the middle and agree on a fee, probably with add-ons that both sides can, they can spin it as a victory. I think that was the case a little bit with Mason Mount last year, in that he'd ended the last year of his Chelsea contract. Chelsea agreed to sell him for an overall £60 million fee, which is good going for a selling club. From United's perspective, they paid £55 million up front for someone they claimed was a first choice target, who had played in numerous cup finals, was 24, is an England international, is a key signing to go into the first team. Normally, if you're trying to sign an England international who's attached to a big Premier League club, you're not spending £55 million. You're spending close to double that, possibly. And United were never going to spend close to double that. So both sides could spin it as a victory. It ceased to be a victory for United about 2 games into the season, when Mount won a mismatch with Casemiro, and also he got injured for the first time, and then he barely started again in the Premier League. So it's certainly been a bigger victory for Chelsea than it has been for United. But that's I guess an example of how it can work out for both sides in terms of spinning that as a victory. And let's face it, Everton, when they do have very good young players who come through, they have a very short shelf life at Everton. John Stones was 22 when he left Everton. I think Branthwaite turns 22 this week. He may already have turned 22. I think his birthday was pretty imminent. Wayne Rooney was 18 when he was sold. I guess Ross Barkley was the exception, in that he stayed a little bit longer than people imagined. But I think that was because although the talent has always been there, he certainly did waver, and that's why in the end he joined Chelsea for quite a low fee of about £20 million in 2018. It would have been, but normally, I suppose, with the Rooney and Stones examples, you'd look at that's what Everton would be thinking of when it comes to potentially or possibly or probably selling Branthwaite this summer. But it's, I think, although we're in the transfer window, and of course we have to write about it, it's I think writing about transfers, it's almost like someone who works at Cadbury's and goes off chocolate. It's not something that that appeals to you as much by the end of it.
No, definitely not. And like I say, what we're seeing this week is just a bit of a farce, really. The rules clearly need changing. I mean, you mentioned City there. I guess you could say that their selling of academy players is just a good way of making revenue and creating value. What we're seeing with Chelsea, Everton signing Tim Iriogbenam, is it, from Villa, and selling them Lewis Dobbin, and Matson going from Chelsea to Villa, and Chelsea signing Amari Kellerman for 19 million from Villa. I mean, I've never heard of him. These are just
I've never heard of some of these players. I was just about to say.
No, exactly. It's deals purely done to boost the balance sheet, and it's a joke that the rules mean you're encouraged to sell academy players, and also you're essentially trading some of these players to clubs who might not even want them. They're only being Kellerman and Irogbenam are only going to Everton and Villa purely because they need to go there to boost the balance sheet. The move's not in their best interests, and that's not a good position for football to be in. But taking it back to United, I mean, the Branthwaite thing is going to be interesting for Ineos because Ratcliffe is clearly of a mind that, we roll out his dumb money quote pretty regularly at the moment, and I guess it still will be rolled out until United prove otherwise. And they're absolutely adamant that they won't go near this 70 million for Branthwaite, and rightly so. But you can see why Everton would feel emboldened to keep saying it's 70 million, because United have been here before with Harry Maguire, they've been here before with Anthony, they've been here before with Mason Mount, they've been here before with Rasmus Højlund. All of those players, we were told, we're not going to go to that fee, and they went to that fee and beyond sometimes with Anthony. So you can understand why every single club looks at United and says, we don't believe you, when they're trying to play hardball. And I guess, over Branthwaite, they need to make a stand, don't they? I think Everton are in a position where they probably do have to do a deal eventually. But United have to make a point here that we are different. We have changed. We are not just going to be the pushovers of the transfer market, because people at United always talk of the United tax, but they've kind of created that themselves by the way they've behaved in the transfer market in recent years. And if Ineos want to change that, at some point, they're going to have to just accept that a deal can't be done. And maybe that won't happen with Branthwaite, but it does feel like it's quite a defining transfer for how Ineos want to be seen in terms of how they operate in the market.
The United tax is United's own fault. I completely agree with you. This is a club that in their first transfer window after Ferguson retired, ignored Marouane Fellaini's, what was it, £23.5 million or £23 million release clause that had an expiry date of July 31st. And then a month later, they decided to sign him for £4 million more, a £27.5 million deal, having bid £28 million for Fellaini and Leighton Baines about 3 or 4 weeks earlier. This is how amateurish they were. And so they've never really recovered from that. And of course, in January, it's a club record signing of Juan Mata. That was the first time they'd spent more than £30 million on a player in 5.5 years, it would have been. Berbatov was a club record signing, 30.75 million on deadline day in 2008. And then they didn't spend more than £30 million until Mata in January 2014. Then, of course, in August 2014, it's a British record signing of Angel Di Maria in a summer that they spent more than £150 million on 6 players. And the following summer, it's Anthony Marshall coming in, who was largely unknown, only 19 at the time, in a deal worth up to £58 million. So that's he's almost costing as much as someone they'd just signed who'd won the Champions League the year before at the time he signed and was a starter for Argentina in their run to the World Cup final. Here they are, 12 months later, spending nearly as much on someone who was largely unknown outside of France. A year later, it's a world record deal for Paul Pogba. Fair enough, the next year, they're still spending a fair amount of money. The Lukaku fee overall would have been, that was technically a club record, but the add-ons never triggered it to the 90 million stage. Year after that, world record fee for a defender in Harry Maguire, £80 million. He is still the most expensive defender in football's history. And there have been examples since then as well. Casemiro, 60 million rising to 70 million. Anthony, 86.3 million pounds. The Højlund deal last year, I mean, from a professional perspective, I think those of us out there on the tour were quite peeved by the manner of that, because we were explicitly told by United that they wouldn't go above £60 million for Højlund. They not only went above £60 million in paying an upfront fee of £64 million, but they included add-ons that would take his overall fee to £72 million. And given his age and the length of contract, there's a chance that he will cost them £12 million more than they said that they would actually pay for him. So they can complain about the United tax all they like, but they are responsible for it. You look at their spending in the last years of Ferguson's reign, and I'd say probably after the Wayne Rooney deal, which was in 2004, they were very, very careful how they spent, and thus it's no coincidence that started with the Glazers coming in 2005. That summer, it's Ji-sung Park and Edwin van der Sar coming in for something like, I think Park might have been 4.5 million, van der Sar 2.5 million. I mean, this is a completely different era, as the fee suggests. The following year in the winter, and this is great recruitment as well, by the way, 5 million for Evra and 7 million for Vidic. In the summer, they Daniel Levy obviously digs his heels in over Michael Carrick. That goes from a £10 million deal to an £18.6 million deal, which was seen as quite steep, but look at what a brilliant player he was over 12 years. Year after that, they're quite careful again. I think Nani was £17 million, which was reasonable. The Anderson fee, Porto's accounts later on, many years later, showed, I think that was a fee that actually went up to £25 million. So, okay, that was steep, and he was not a success for United, but he was part of a successful era, so he's thought of quite fondly by a lot of supporters. Owen Hargreaves, I think, was about £18 million. So, okay, they only got one good season out of him because of the injuries, but what a season it was. They won the league title and they won the Champions League. I don't think they win the Champions League without Hargreaves. He was that key for them as well. Then it's the Berbatov club record in 2008. And after that, post-Ronaldo deal, Glazonomics, no value in the market, all this claptrap that Ferguson was coming out with. It's bargain basement stuff. It's Gabriel Oberton, it's Bebe, Michael Owen on a freebie after he'd got relegated with Newcastle, and it was testament to Ferguson's genius, and also at times the lack of quality in the Premier League that United went. His final 4 seasons post Ronaldo with very little spending, it's second first, and they came second on the final day of those seasons in 2009-10 and 2011-12. And okay, they did spend, they went above the £20 million mark for Robin van Persie when they signed him from Arsenal, which was about £24 million. But he had entered the last year of his contract, so Arsenal couldn't command as hefty a fee as they would have liked for someone who at that time was undeniably one of the best strikers in the world and was also the top scorer in the Premier League the previous season. And United's 2 big signings that summer in 2012 were Van Persie and Shinji Kagawa. And Kagawa had also entered the last year of his contract, Borussia Dortmund. So although the Glazers did inhibit United in the final years under Ferguson, their recruitment, I'd say not so much his final 4 years at the club, but from 2005 to 2013 was largely very good. They got brilliant longevity from A lot of those players, good servants, good players, contributed to a lot of success at the club. They didn't spend many silly fees. And then, of course, there's the changing of the guard with David Moyes coming in and Ed Woodward coming in. And then it's just amateur hour. And it's not really improved a great deal, however much they've tried to, preach, being sensible, not being held to ransom. And what was the phrase last year about John Murta? He held the line, I think it was, wasn't it? John Murta held the line. They wouldn't spend more than 60 million on Mason Mount, and they didn't. They got him for 55 million, rising to 60 million, but they also did sign someone who then had the season that he had. And he had just entered the last year of his Chelsea contract. And there were a lot of people who just didn't think he was a suitable target for United. So this United tax, history and facts tell you that they are to blame for it. The people who have been running the club are to blame for it. Clubs have seen them come in a mile off, and they've chanced their arm with them. And more often than not, United have caved in, and they did as recently as Anthony. They caved in there. You could say they did to a lesser extent over Højlund. There was interest, competition from Paris Saint-Germain, so maybe that forced their hand to up the bid just to see off PSG. But it's still, they still went about it in a way that they didn't intend to. And as I said earlier, regarding Ineos being the story now and the running of the club being the story, it's going to be very interesting to see how they operate in this transfer window. Especially also, Omar Barada said at a ceremony last week that it can be a slippery slope if they overspend on transfer fees, agents' fees, and players' salaries.
Yeah, and that's probably why it seems that they're looking in the bargain bin for a striker this year. We know that and a central defender is at the very top of the priority list, and the names being mentioned at the moment: Joshua Zirkzee with a fairly small release clause, Jonathan David, who's out of contract next year, isn't signing a new one. When a striker comes in, I mean, it's a difficult one to get right anyway, because you obviously want to show faith in Højlund rather than signing another big name striker. But it does appear that it's going to be a smaller name striker and someone that is available for a smaller fee. That seems to be the market they're shopping in for that forward this summer.
And I think we were told last year that they were already looking at players ahead of the next summer. Next summer now being this summer, players who would have a year left on their contract. And Jeremy Frimpong, just as an example, I mean, he's someone who's been of and is of interest to Ten Hag. He was approaching. He would have been out of contract next year, going off his previous deal. Last season, he signed a new contract with Bayer Leverkusen, but it did include a release clause. And looking at players who are into the last year of their contracts and players who have release clauses are categories of interest for a club who have, people say, tens of millions to spend. That's their budget. It's not hundreds of millions, it's tens of millions. And they also have the profitability and sustainability rules to meet and to comply with. And so a workaround is to look at targets of interest who have got a release clause or have got are about to have less than 12 months on their contract, and therefore their value isn't going to be as high as it would have been last year. So I understand it. It's not ideal, but United, the way they've operated, they reap what they sow. They've overspent grossly on too many players in the last 11 years, and that's why they're in this situation. They are striving to meet PSR because they have been dreadful at selling players. They get dreadful fees for them. It's not a coincidence that if you look at their highest player sales in the two summer transfer windows under Ten Hag, it's Elanga, Henderson, Pereira, Garner. All four of them are academy players, so they represent a pure profit. And the only exception who I think comes in that bracket is Fred, who they got, I think it was a €10 million fee, rising to €15 million from Fenerbahce. And then they undermined that somewhat by giving Fenerbahce $4 million for a backup goalkeeper. So, Fenerbahce, I think, would quite rightly look at that Fred deal and getting their backup goalkeeper out of the club as more of a success than United did in terms of selling a player who was pretty important for them. Maybe too important at times, and bring in a backup goalkeeper in whose only appearance last season was away to Newport in the FA Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, that seems a good place to leave it. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. We'll be back maybe later in the week, depending on what happens, but definitely next week. So join us next time for a bit more transfer chat, a bit more summer chat. But for now, remember to leave us a like, subscribe, and we'll speak to you all soon.